A respected church elder stands at the pulpit, delivering a sermon on morality to a devoted congregation. His voice is steady, reassuring. But just hours earlier, in the cold glow of a monitor, this same man was navigating the darkest corners of the internet, paying a global syndicate in Bitcoin to have his wife assassinated. When righteous faith masks digital calculation, the result is a terrifying paradox. This is the story of a holy man who outsourced a murder before doing it himself. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more cases. This helps us a lot. Thank you. Cottage Grove, Minnesota, sits roughly 10 miles south of St. Paul. It is a sprawling, affluent suburb defined by large properties, heavy winter snowfalls, and neighbors who respect boundaries while maintaining a polite, observational distance. In the late autumn, the temperature regularly drops below 30 degrees Fahrenheit, freezing the topsoil and casting a gray, muted pallor over the landscape. It is the kind of community where outward appearances dictate social standing, where manicured lawns, quiet driveways, and regular church attendance serve as undeniable indicators of moral and financial stability. At 43 years old, Amy Allwine thrived in this structured environment. She was a woman in perpetual motion, defined by a fierce work ethic and a profound, almost intuitive connection with animals. Her passion was canine behavior, an interest she successfully transformed into a highly lucrative enterprise called Active Dog Sports Training. Running the business from a specialized, customized facility located right on their expansive 2-acre property, Amy was known throughout the county for her boundless energy. She spent her days navigating complex agility courses, her heavy boots kicking up dust and damp earth, her voice a steady, authoritative command echoing across the yard. Her clients and friends respected her deeply. They saw a vibrant, physically fit woman who adored her work and her family. Her clients often noted her relentless optimism. If an animal was struggling with a difficult obedience routine, Amy would spend hours in the freezing cold, refusing to give up until the breakthrough occurred. Her medical and personal history was completely clear. There was no shadow of mental instability, no whispers of depression, anxiety, or internal weariness. She was a stabilizing force, a deeply pragmatic woman who tackled challenges head-on rather than retreating from them. Her husband, 44-year-old Stephen Allwine, presented a different, yet equally impressive kind of stability. Stephen was an IT specialist and software developer by trade. He spent his weekdays immersed in code, network security, and complex data architecture. He was a man who understood how to build, hide, and dismantle digital ecosystems from the ground up. Analytical, softly spoken, and fiercely intelligent, he possessed the precise technical proficiency that made him a highly valued asset in the corporate world. But Stephen's true social currency came from his religious life. He was a revered elder and youth pastor at the local chapter of the United Church of God. This conservative Christian denomination demanded strict adherence to traditional values, expecting its members to lead exemplary lives completely insulated from modern vices. Stephen did not just participate in this culture, he championed it. The congregation viewed him as a paragon of virtue. He stood at the front of the church on the Sabbath, delivering impassioned sermons on morality, faith, and the absolute sanctity of marriage. He was so well respected that the church leadership frequently assigned him to provide premarital counseling to young couples, guiding them through the complexities of lifelong commitment. To the outside observer, the Allwine household was flawless. They had been married for 2 decades, navigating the years without a single public scandal or rumor of discontent. They had an adopted son whom they both appeared to cherish deeply. Their life was meticulously constructed, resting on a dual foundation of financial security from their respective careers and unwavering moral authority from their deep embeddedness in the church hierarchy. Their property reflected this careful curation. It was a multi-level home flanked by tall, old-growth trees that provided total privacy from the main road. Inside, the environment was a study in contrasts that somehow worked in perfect unison. The faint, sterile hum of Stephen's computer arrays and servers in his climate-controlled home office stood opposite the lively, animal-scented air of Amy's training center, just steps away across the driveway. It was an ecosystem of perfect balance, an immaculate execution of the suburban dream. There was absolutely no reason for local law enforcement to ever glance in their direction. Behind the heavy wooden doors of their Cottage Grove home, the marriage was quietly decomposing. Stephen's public sermons on marital sanctity were nothing more than a carefully rehearsed performance. His church strictly forbade divorce except under the most extreme, biblically justified circumstances. A legal separation would mean stripping him of his elder status, his community standing, and his meticulously curated reputation. For a man whose entire identity was built on moral superiority and absolute control, a public fall from grace was fundamentally unacceptable. The network security expert used his technical prowess to heavily compartmentalize his existence. Long before the dark web became his primary weapon, Stephen navigated the digital underground of infidelity. He frequented Ashley Madison, a platform specifically designed for married individuals seeking affairs. He created a profile using the username DogDayGod, an incredibly arrogant, mocking inversion of his religious persona and his wife's canine training profession. He arranged illicit meetings during out-of-state business trips, engaging in multiple physical affairs while continuing to lead youth group meetings and premarital counseling sessions back home. The cognitive dissonance was absolute. He felt no remorse, only the sharp thrill of outsmarting the people around him. But maintaining a string of hidden affairs was a severe logistical risk. A divorce remained a social death sentence. To Stephen, the optimal solution was not a clean break. It was a complete erasure. A widower commands deep sympathy. A divorcee invites endless scrutiny. Furthermore, a grieving husband inherits everything, including a $500,000 life insurance policy. His highly analytical mind stripped away the humanity of his spouse. He stopped viewing his partner of 20 years as a living, breathing person. She became a redundant line of code that needed to be permanently deleted from his operating system. In early 2016, Stephen booted up the Tor browser. As an IT professional, he understood encryption protocols, proxy servers, and digital anonymity far better than the average user. He believed the dark net was his absolute sanctuary, a place where his keystrokes could never be traced back to his physical IP address. Bypassing the surface internet, he plunged into the encrypted underworld, navigating through illicit marketplaces until he found a site called Besa Mafia. The platform presented itself as an international syndicate of contract killers. It boasted a sleek, professional interface, promising absolute discretion, guaranteed results, and a tiered pricing structure for different types of assassinations. To the software developer, it looked like a legitimate, highly organized digital enterprise. He registered an account, recycling his old moniker, DogDayGod. Stephen initiated contact with the site administrators in late February. His instructions were terrifyingly clinical. He did not write like a husband orchestrating the violent death of his wife. He communicated like a project manager outlining specific deliverables. He provided a comprehensive targeting dossier on Amy. He uploaded photographs, detailed her daily schedule, outlined her commuting routes, and mapped the exact layout of the active dog sports training facility. He specified that the hit needed to look like a random tragedy, a fatal car crash during her drive to a client, or a robbery gone wrong in the training yard. To fund the operation, Stephen needed untraceable currency. He began quietly siphoning funds from their joint bank accounts, converting the US dollars into Bitcoin. He moved the digital assets through various tumbling services to obscure the transaction history, effectively laundering his own money before transferring roughly $6,000 to the Besa Mafia escrow wallet. Then, the waiting game began. For months, Stephen stood at the pulpit on Sunday mornings, looking out at his congregation, knowing he had just paid for his wife's execution. He would return home, sit across the dinner table from Amy, listen to her talk about her day, and later retreat to the sterile hum of his office to check his encrypted inbox for updates. But the dark web is an ecosystem built entirely on deceit. Besa Mafia was not a criminal cartel. It was an elaborate, highly successful scam run by overseas cybercriminals, designed specifically to defraud people seeking to hire hitmen. The administrators knew their clients could never go to the police to report a stolen payment. Weeks dragged into months. The site operators strung Stephen along with a series of fabricated excuses. They claimed the assigned operative was arrested on a separate weapons charge. They stated the target was in a highly visible area and requested more funds to hire a specialized sniper. Stephen, blinded by his own arrogance and desperate for results, paid them. He sent another massive Bitcoin transfer, pushing his total investment over $12,000 by the end of spring. His messages grew increasingly impatient and cold-blooded. He suggested a new, gruesome method, asking if the hitman could simply burn down the house while his wife was sleeping inside. He explicitly promised to ensure their son was away at a sleepover and the dog would be removed from the building, leaving only Amy in the inferno. By late summer, the digital facade collapsed. A massive cyber attack targeted Besa Mafia, exposing its entire database, including user messages, targeting dossiers, and Bitcoin wallets, to the surface web. Stephen's encrypted communications were suddenly vulnerable. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The assassins were never coming. The money was gone. If he wanted his wife erased, the IT expert would have to step away from his keyboard and get his own hands dirty. November 13th, 2016. The ambient temperature in Cottage Grove plummeted into the low 30s. A biting wind stripped the last dead leaves from the old-growth trees surrounding the property. Sunday afternoons in this affluent zip code were built for quiet domesticity, but inside the house, the atmosphere was suffocating. Stephen's digital proxy war had failed. The encrypted syndicate he had trusted with thousands of dollars in Bitcoin was nothing more than a ghost in the machine. He could no longer rely on external operators to rewrite his reality. The IT specialist had to bridge the gap between the virtual and the physical. He had already procured the necessary hardware. Months prior, operating under a veil of manufactured paranoia, Stephen had purchased a 9mm Springfield XDS handgun. He had justified the legal acquisition to his wife by pointing to a series of anonymous, threatening emails she had recently received. Emails that Stephen himself had drafted and routed through secure proxy servers to terrorize her and establish a documented history of danger. Alongside the ballistic preparation, he possessed a biological weapon. Deep in the encrypted marketplaces, after the hitman negotiations stalled, he had purchased a concentrated supply of scopolamine. Harvested primarily from plants in the nightshade family, the chemical is heavily trafficked on the black market under the moniker Devil's Breath. In microscopic doses, it manages motion sickness. In high, unregulated concentrations, it is devastating. It functions as a powerful anticholinergic agent, rapidly crossing the blood-brain barrier to strip away free will, inducing profound lethargy, severe disorientation, and eventual total muscle paralysis. It leaves no obvious superficial trauma. It was an elegant, invisible mechanism for absolute control. The afternoon stretched out. Their son was occupied away from the immediate vicinity of the main living area. Stephen prepared the dose. The crystalline powder dissolved effortlessly into a liquid medium, its bitter chemical signature easily masked. He handed the preparation to Amy. She accepted it without a fraction of hesitation. Decades of marriage build a dangerous, impenetrable baseline of trust. A spouse does not screen a casual afternoon beverage for industrial-grade incapacitants. Stephen observed the pharmacology deploy. The onset was slow, insidious, and absolutely relentless. Amy's physical coordination visibly deteriorated. Her speech grew heavy, her eyes losing their sharp focus as the alkaloid flooded her neural pathways, interrupting the transmission of vital nerve impulses. The fiercely pragmatic dog trainer, a woman whose entire livelihood relied on rapid reflexes and physical stamina, collapsed into a state of docile lethargy. Stephen watched this total system failure, not with the panic of a concerned husband, but with the cold, clinical detachment of a programmer watching a script execute. He waited in the quiet room until her motor functions were completely overridden. He moved her limp body into the master bedroom. The space was heavily insulated from the bitter wind rattling the window panes outside. He positioned her on the hardwood floor near the foot of the bed. The geometry of a self-inflicted wound requires precise angles, a physical staging that Stephen believed he had calculated perfectly. He retrieved the 9mm Springfield from its secure location. He chambered around, He stood directly over the woman he had spent 2 decades with. His breathing remained remarkably steady. He placed the muzzle in close proximity to her head. He pulled the trigger. The percussive shockwave of the heavy caliber round detonating inside the enclosed space was catastrophic. It instantly shattered the acoustic vacuum of the house, leaving a high-pitched, metallic ringing in the air. The heavy, sulfurous smell of burnt cordite and vaporized lead flooded the bedroom, settling onto the fabric of the bedsheets and the carpet. Stephen exhaled. The biological firewall was breached, but the chaotic, fluid reality of a gunshot wound immediately overwhelmed his theoretical models. The human vascular system is highly pressurized. Blood did not pool neatly in a localized area. It surged outward. It soaked rapidly into the floorboards, expanding in aggressive, asymmetrical patterns. Adrenaline finally spiked in Stephen's bloodstream. His heart rate hammered violently against his ribs. He grabbed a towel, dropping to his knees to intercept the spreading crimson fluid. He wiped frantically at the floor, attempting to control the visual narrative of the scene. It was a panicked, mechanical failure. Instead of cleaning the surface, he smeared the blood, creating highly unnatural swipe marks and transfer patterns on the hardwood. These heavy streaks completely contradicted the organic physics of a sudden, self-inflicted trauma. Realizing the cleanup was only compounding his errors, he abandoned the towel and focused on the weapon. The narrative required the gun to be in her hand, or immediately adjacent to it, to sell the fiction of a sudden, insurmountable depression. He meticulously wiped the polymer grip of the Springfield, stripping away his own biometric data and fingerprint oils. He leaned over her body and placed the firearm on the floor. In the rapid sequence of post-execution adrenaline, his tunnel vision narrowed. The meticulous software developer made a foundational, catastrophic error. He set the heavy weapon mere inches from Amy's left hand. Amy was distinctly right-handed. It was a glaring forensic impossibility. The mechanics of a right-handed individual firing a 9mm pistol into the right hemisphere of their own skull, only for the weapon to miraculously land adjacent to their non-dominant hand, defied extreme physical logic. Stephen, entirely consumed by the digital architecture of his crime, failed the most basic test of physical staging. He left the body exactly where it lay. He stripped away his contaminated clothing, moving to a sink to aggressively scrub the microscopic stippling and invisible gunshot residue from his skin and fingernails. He changed into fresh, casual attire. He needed a chronological buffer. The timeline required a documented alibi to completely separate his physical presence from the estimated time of death. He exited the house. The 30-degree air hit his face, sharp and sobering. He started his vehicle and drove out of the secluded neighborhood. His destination was mundane. He navigated the few miles to a local Culver's restaurant, projecting the absolute calm of a typical suburban father running a weekend errand. The heater in his car blasted warm air, masking the lingering chill of the house. He stood at the counter. He engaged in light, transactional conversation with the cashier. He ordered food. He paid with cash, his freshly scrubbed hands exchanging currency just minutes after executing his wife. He collected a time-stamped receipt. This small, fragile slip of paper was his physical firewall. After completing the sequence, he picked up his son from a pre-arranged activity. He played the role of the engaged parent flawlessly during the drive back, the smell of fast food filling the cabin, completely incongruous with the nightmare waiting at their destination. Pulling back onto the property, the house looked entirely undisturbed. The exterior was quiet, the tall trees blocking the fading afternoon light. He walked through the front door, calling out for his wife. The final performance initiated. He guided their son through the hallways, systematically clearing the empty rooms until they approached the master bedroom. The staged visual was horrifying. Stephen immediately escalated his behavior, throwing his hands up and vocalizing a stream of calculated panic. He shielded his son's eyes, grabbed his mobile phone, and backed away from the blood-stained hardwood. Dialing 911, he waited for the dispatcher to connect. When the line opened, Stephen deployed his exact, pre-scripted dialogue. He stated he had just returned home from dinner to find his wife unresponsive on the floor. He noted the presence of a firearm and a massive amount of blood. He modulated his voice, injecting rapid breathing and manufactured distress into his cadence. Most critically, he explicitly communicated to the operator that it appeared his wife had taken her own life, methodically planting the seed of suicide into the official police record before a single patrol unit had even been dispatched to the scene. He ended the call. The faint metallic scent of gunpowder still lingered beneath the smell of copper. He stood in the quiet house, absolutely convinced his intelligence had outmatched the system. The first patrol cruisers arrived at the property within minutes of the dispatch. Red and blue emergency lights cut through the freezing November dusk, illuminating the frosted bark of the trees and casting long, erratic shadows across the driveway. The responding officers approached the front door with the cautious, elevated adrenaline typical of a reported suicide scene. They were met by a man who appeared entirely consumed by grief. Stephen presented as a fractured husband, his breathing ragged, his voice cracking as he directed law enforcement down the hallway toward the master bedroom. Paramedics moved quickly, carrying their heavy medical kits over the threshold. But the moment they crossed into the bedroom, the urgency evaporated. The biological reality was absolute. Amy was gone. The emergency responders stepped back, their focus instantly shifting from medical intervention to scene preservation. When seasoned detectives from the Cottage Grove Police Department took over the perimeter, the initial friction between Stephen's narrative and the physical environment became painfully obvious. Experienced investigators develop a specialized intuition, a subconscious registry of how physics, biology, and human behavior operate during violent trauma. Nothing in the master bedroom aligned with those natural laws. Stephen had explicitly framed the incident as a sudden, isolated act of self-harm. Yet the spatial geometry of the room told a wildly different story. The weapon, a 9mm Springfield XDS, was resting on the hardwood floor in close proximity to Amy's left hand. Detectives immediately noted the mechanical contradiction. The victim was overwhelmingly right-handed. The entry wound was located on the right side of her head. The logistics required to execute such an action were absurd. A right-handed individual would have to hold a heavy, recoil-operated pistol in their non-dominant hand, contort their wrist at a severe, unnatural angle toward the opposite side of their skull, pull the heavy trigger, and somehow allow the weapon to drop perfectly beside the left hand. It was a forensic impossibility. Furthermore, a close contact discharge typically leaves microscopic traces of vaporized lead and unburned powder, known as stippling, on the shooter's hands and wrists. Preliminary visual inspections of the victim's skin revealed a glaring absence of this chemical blowback. The blood evidence further dismantled the grieving husband's timeline. Stephen claimed to have discovered the body immediately upon returning from his errands. A fresh trauma site possesses specific fluid dynamics. Blood pools organically, following gravity and the microscopic contours of the flooring. But the hardwood beneath Amy did not display organic pooling. Instead, investigators documented massive, sweeping transfer smears. Heavy streaks cut across the grain of the wood. This was not the aftermath of a sudden collapse. This was the unmistakable signature of a panicked cleanup effort. Someone had knelt in the biological fluid, attempted to wipe it away with a cloth or towel, and only succeeded in spreading the contamination over a wider surface area. The anomalies compounded. As crime scene technicians deployed high-intensity alternating light sources, they detected a distinct bloody footwear impression pressed into the floorboards. The tread pattern belonged to a shoe that neither the victim nor the responding paramedics were wearing. While the forensic team meticulously photographed the contradictions, Stephen remained in the living room, executing his performance. He wept into his hands. He accepted the quiet condolences of the patrol officers. But his verbal output was highly irregular. Innocent people in the grip of sudden trauma are typically fragmented, struggling to recall basic details or sequence events. Stephen, however, was aggressively coherent regarding his own movements. Unprompted, he repeatedly emphasized his exact timeline. He proactively detailed his trip to the fast food restaurant, ensuring the officers understood he was miles away when the weapon discharged. He even produced the time-stamped receipt, offering it as an absolute shield against any lingering suspicion. He was not behaving like a man trying to understand why his wife was dead. He was behaving like a suspect, desperate to prove he wasn't there. As the sun fully set, the flashing lights of the crime scene unit drew the attention of the surrounding neighborhood. In a community where violent crime was virtually non-existent, the presence of yellow barrier tape was a seismic event. Within hours, the news fractured the quiet suburb. The social echo hit the United Church of God with devastating force. The congregation was entirely paralyzed by the preliminary reports. The concept of the vibrant dog trainer taking her own life was completely incompatible with the woman they knew. She was a pillar of unyielding optimism. She was managing a highly successful business, booking clients months in advance, and actively making long-term plans for her family. There were no financial ruins, no whispered mental health crises, no history of substance abuse. The psychological profile of a suicide victim simply did not exist within her. Yet the church community instinctively rallied around their elder. In the days following the incident, the property was inundated with quiet support. Fellow congregants delivered meals, organized prayer vigils, and offered to help manage the training facility. Stephen absorbed their sympathy flawlessly. He stood in the center of his home, accepting embraces from the very people he had spent years preaching to, projecting the image of a devout man tested by an unfathomable tragedy. But behind the yellow tape, the police had officially locked down the residence. The medical examiner arrived to transport the remains, triggering the protocol for a comprehensive autopsy and a full toxicology screen. Detectives surveyed the exterior access points of the home. Every window was intact. Every door lock was undamaged. The alarm system showed no irregular breaches. There were no missing electronics, no scattered jewelry, no signs of a panicked intruder tearing through the house for valuables. The environment was completely contained. The investigators realized they were not hunting a phantom burglar or piecing together a tragic depressive spiral. The perimeter was secure. The predator had never forced his way inside the home because he already had the keys. The physical investigation initially mirrored the frozen, stagnant landscape outside. Detectives canvassed the expansive properties along the street, pulling grainy security footage from neighboring doorbell cameras and interviewing residents. They found absolutely nothing. There were no unfamiliar vehicles navigating the quiet cul-de-sacs, no suspicious figures moving through the tree lines, and no signs of forced entry. The murder weapon recovered at the scene was legally registered to the homeowner. The bloody footprint pressed into the hardwood, while a critical anomaly was merely an isolated variable without a matching shoe or a suspect to place inside it. For the first few weeks, the Cottage Grove police were staring at a localized, perfectly contained vacuum. The momentum finally shifted inside the sterile, brightly lit environment of the county morgue. The medical examiner conducted a comprehensive autopsy, officially documenting the forensic impossibilities the detectives had already noted. The entry wound trajectory, the complete absence of vaporized lead on the victim's hands, and the awkward weapon placement formally ruled out self-harm. But the catastrophic blow to the grieving husband's narrative arrived later, hidden deep within a multi-page toxicology report. Forensic pathologists isolated an extreme concentration of scopolamine in the victim's bloodstream. The presence of this potent anticholinergic agent was a glaring, insurmountable red flag. Devil's breath is not a recreational substance. It is not prescribed by local physicians for common ailments, and it is absolutely not found casually in a Midwestern suburb. Its primary function on the black market is the complete subversion of free will and motor control. The chemical signature proved extensive premeditation. The victim had been systematically paralyzed from the inside out before the fatal shot was ever fired. The focus of the investigation immediately pivoted. If the physical environment offered no intruders, the breach had to be digital. Law enforcement executed a sweeping search warrant on the residence, treating the house not just as a physical crime scene, but as a compromised data server. Technicians moved through the rooms, unplugging arrays and placing mobile phones, hard drives, laptops, and extensive networking hardware into specialized Faraday bags to block any remote wiping signals. When the investigators carried the equipment out to their transport vehicles, the IT specialist offered no resistance. He projected an aura of quiet cooperation, entirely insulated by a dangerous strain of technological arrogance. He had spent his entire career building corporate firewalls, managing data encryption, and scrubbing digital footprints. He operated under the absolute assumption that his wiping utilities and proxy servers had permanently obliterated his tracks. He deeply underestimated the forensic capabilities of federal cybercrimes units. The local police handed the hardware over to specialized computer forensic analysts. These experts attached write blockers to the seized drives, ensuring the original data could not be altered, and began cloning the architecture. They did not simply look at existing files. They reconstructed the digital ghosts left behind in the unallocated space of the platters. When data is deleted, an operating system merely removes the pointer to the file, leaving the raw, binary information intact until it is eventually overwritten. The analysts deployed deep recovery algorithms, systematically scraping the microscopic fragments of deleted data from the suspects' machines. Within days, the encryption began to fracture. Investigators pulled fragmented artifacts of the Tor browser from the hardware. They found a long, documented history of secure connections routing through encrypted nodes across the globe. They extracted the recovered browser history and discovered the heavily used Ashley Madison profile. The facade of the devout church elder shattered on the laboratory monitors, instantly replaced by the profile of a serial adulterer operating under the mocking alias. But adultery is not homicide. The detectives needed the financial link. The critical pivot point materialized within the blockchain. The suspect had assumed that converting his assets into Bitcoin provided total, impenetrable anonymity. While cryptocurrency wallets do not have traditional names attached to them, the blockchain itself is an immutable, permanent public ledger. Every single transaction is recorded forever. Forensic accountants secured subpoenas for the suspect's traditional bank records and began cross-referencing his cash withdrawals with centralized cryptocurrency exchanges. The financial analysts traced the movement of thousands of US dollars into a Coinbase account. From there, they meticulously followed the digital currency as it was transferred into tumbling services. Virtual mixers designed to obscure the origin of the funds by bouncing them through thousands of microtransactions. By deploying advanced blockchain analysis software, federal investigators untangled the scrambled math. They traced a direct, undeniable line from the IT specialist's bank account to an external dark web escrow wallet. The destination of those funds completely broke the case wide open. Months earlier, a highly publicized cyber attack on the Visa Mafia network had dumped its entire encrypted database onto the surface web. It was a massive repository of illicit commerce, exposed and easily accessible to federal law enforcement. When detectives queried the hacked database for the suspect's Bitcoin wallet addresses and his preferred alias, the system returned a devastating cache of communication. Sitting in the quiet hum of the cyber lab, investigators read the exact clinical instructions the software developer had typed out over the spring and summer. They stared at the targeting dossier containing photographs of the victim, her daily routines, and the blueprints of her dog training facility. They tracked his mounting frustration, reading his demands for a refund when the fabricated assassins failed to materialize. They processed the cold, sociopathic messages where a husband explicitly requested his home be burned to the ground with his wife trapped inside. The psychological profile of the perpetrator crystallized in the evidence room. He was not a man pushed to the brink by a sudden argument, nor was he a victim of a tragic home invasion. He was an apex predator who viewed human life as an administrative inconvenience. He had spent months of logistical planning and nearly $12,000 trying to outsource an execution. When the digital syndicate defrauded him, his arrogance simply rerouted. He applied the same clinical detachment to the physical act of murder that he had applied to his keyboard. The digital trail provided a timeline of premeditation so dense and undeniable that any defensive narrative was rendered mathematically impossible. The cyber footprint confirmed that the grieving widower who had sobbed to the 911 dispatcher had been actively trying to purchase his wife's death for nearly a year. In early 2018, the Washington County Courthouse became the stage for a clinical deconstruction of a double life. The prosecution bypassed emotional appeals, building their case entirely on mathematics, toxicology, and the immutable ledger of the blockchain. The former youth pastor sat motionless at the defense table as his pristine reputation dissolved in real time. Courtroom projectors illuminated the grim reality behind his religious facade, displaying his illicit profiles, the detailed targeting dossiers uploaded to the dark web, and the Bitcoin transfers tying his bank accounts directly to the digital syndicate. The defense attempted to argue that unknown hackers had framed the IT specialist, spoofing his IP address to orchestrate an elaborate extortion plot. It was a desperate legal theory that completely failed to explain the massive, paralyzing dose of devil's breath in the victim's system, or the glaring physical impossibility of a heavy 9mm pistol resting mere inches from her non-dominant hand. The jury required less than 8 hours to cut through the technical smokescreen. They delivered a guilty verdict for first-degree premeditated murder. The presiding judge immediately handed down the absolute maximum penalty, life in a state penitentiary without the possibility of parole. The man who had spent his entire career constructing impenetrable digital firewalls was permanently locked behind a concrete one. We lock our doors to keep the threat on the outside. We expect violence to come from a shattered window or a stranger in the street, but this case dismantles that comfort, proving that true terror doesn't always break in. Sometimes it holds the title to the property. Behind a firewall of religious piety and encrypted data, a husband methodically optimized his marriage for deletion. It leaves a brutal reality. The most dangerous predators don't hide in the alleys. They sleep in your bed. If you are finished watching, you're a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and give it a like. See you in the next video.